You are listening to the Practicing the Art of Small Business podcast with Shannyn Merlo and Julie Parker. Join their conversation about business, leadership, and the self-awareness journey to greater success.
Welcome, Shannyn, to this episode 20 of Practicing the Art of Small Business. How is thee today?
Thee is wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for joining us, listeners. How have you been, Julie? It's been another couple of weeks since we last recorded.
It has. It's so lucky that we schedule this in for every week, so we do get to speak every second week because life gets busy. It's working a trick for me, so thank you for your patience with me for the past couple of cancellations.
And it always works well because it's always on those days where I'm like, hopefully Julie will cancel. Hopefully Julie will cancel.
I love being reliable. It's one of my values. What are we going to be focusing on today, Shannyn?
Well, I thought that what we could focus on is about this idea that we say that we want feedback or we want insight into what we're doing wrong if we're insightful enough around our leadership and we want to improve. But actually, when the rubber hits the road, or we don't want to hear it, or we don't take it with grace, or we project our emotions onto those people, which means that they learn to not give us that feedback. And there's probably been a couple of patterns with clients and even myself, which brings this to the forefront. So I thought that we could discuss that today and maybe how to support our leaders to encourage feedback and to cope with the internal stuff that happens when our hurdy bits are poked.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I love this topic. I have learned from history that when I do ask for feedback and they give me points of improvement, it's not received well when I slap them for that information. I think it makes me feel better, though. They should pay for saying something bad about me, that's for sure. But this is a fantastic topic because I think we would like to think we are robust enough to receive feedback from people. We're also intelligent enough to recognise that it is just their opinion. They may not be speaking a complete truth, universal truth. It might be just their truth. But how on earth are we supposed to be happy about receiving points for improvement for other people? What's been your journey around that?
So thank you for asking. What I'm aware of is that my initial reaction actually does come with a little bit of defensiveness. So I'm very open to receiving feedback, but I do know through my body sensations that my body tells me that I'm not happy to receive it. So I think that I've become very hyper aware of when, I'm being certain things are getting triggered within me. And there's certainly been times prior to when I haven't been as aware where I've been more defensive than in the past. I think at the moment, probably when I receive feedback, I become a bit defensive and justifying. And I could certainly learn to be more gracious. I'll give an example. I was working with a mentor of mine and I had a difficult sales process, and it became aware to me that the prospect was not a good match for me. And I invited the prospect to, in a conversation that we had, I said, look, I don't think that we're a match, and I'm going to let you go away and have a think about this and come back to me, because I don't think we're having a difficult discussion here. I don't think that we can go forward. And, it's really important for me to work with people who I think that we can work well together. I then sent the prospect an email, and it was pretty much I'm pushing you off the ledge email. I wrote it with the intention of saying, I do not think we're a match. Do not hold loyalty to me. And I could have perhaps done it better to say, actually, I don't think we're a match and I'm going to self-select, but I wanted them to also have agency to make the decision. I forwarded the email to a mentor, and the mentor was like, Shannyn, let me give you some feedback.
And you're like, let me brace myself.
Yeah, but you don't understand the situation. I was trying to push the person off the and it was I was really trying to justify my own positioning in the experience, and I was still probably emotionally attached to the experience as well. But I could have received the feedback with more grace, and I could have received the feedback with a real learning mindset. But I think because I so wanted to be right in my justification, that I pushed onto this mentor that I've made the right decision, as opposed to hearing from them and using it as a growth opportunity. And I think that a lot of our leaders can actually attest to this, where it's like, I'm happy to receive the feedback, but actually you need to understand that I made these choices and I did this a certain way, so I don't really want your feedback. Do you think that that's common for people who reach a stage of leadership where they have to back themselves, they have to back the decisions they've made? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a part of being quite aware of where you should be receiving that feedback from. Not everyone has an equal voice in this space. A lovely example of this is Charles Coves, Gloria's husband, professional speaker. He's been a professional speaker for 28 years or something like that now. And he, those, when you go along to see some speakers, they give you the survey to the audience members for feedback around how they performed. Charles never does that. And he says, because they're not the people in a position to be able to give feedback. He was he was president of National Speakers Association for many, many years. And that is a professional speaking institute, in a sense, that train in, stand here, that voice modulation, this bit of content, deliver it this way. It's very specific around how to deliver an effective presentation. And he said, those are the opinions that mean something. They're researched, they're thoughtful, they understand the agenda and what we're trying to get out of this. It's all around growth within that space and development. And so I think it is absolutely prudent that when we are open to feedback from everyone, but we put it through that filter of what does this person know, what have they experienced, what wisdom do they have in this space, in order for their opinion to have whatever level of value to me. And therefore, that's how seriously I take it.
I do want to challenge that thought, though, and that there's application to this in workplaces. Because if you're talking to me and I'm in your audience and I'm not connecting, it actually really doesn't matter what the feedback from the professional association is. If I'm your audience and I'm not actually able to consume what you're saying, then you've missed the mark. And so I do think that even in a workplace where you disagree with someone, or they're not your direct report, or they're not seen as significant to your role, there's still opportunities to learn if you're having an impact on that person and it's not the impact that you want to be having.
And can I further challenge the audience thing?
You can challenge me.
And give you another analogy?
You can analogy and you can challenge. I'll be a little bit defensive to start off with, and I'll probably then go back and justify the reason why I believe what I believe.
Because we're both right. We have to be both right. When I maintain that the audience members aren't the one that are appropriate to receive the feedback from and let that adjust the way you do things in the future, because maybe you're not his particular market. Just like with me, I send my emails out to thousands of dental practices every few days, and there are opt-outs that come through every now and again. And at the start of my journey, I used to look at those opt-outs and feel like a failure, and have those opt-outs as a trigger for me to try to adjust and tweak the way I was emailing out. And this went over for a number of years. But then after doing some research into it, I'm not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And if I'm not your cup of tea, you're not my market. I'm going to stop trying to talk to you and instead look at your opt-out or look at your disinterest in my presentation and go, fantastic, you are making my list richer, because now I'm left with all the people that do like the way I present, do like the message and the content that I deliver, and therefore are my market. You are the ones that are more likely to buy from me, not the ones that I'm displeasing for whatever reason, because as you know, one of Charles's lessons is that we're all weirdos. Who knows why we like one person over another? We determine that within the first 4 seconds of knowing somebody before any presentations actually happened. We've determined within the first 4 seconds whether this person is somebody that we like or not. And so I think that as a leader coming into an organization, it depends on the kind of feedback you're talking about. If you said to a group of employees, I want you to feel as happy as possible in this workplace, you are going to get, just say there's 20 employees, you're going to get 20 wildly different opinions around what makes them happy. Some of them might say, I want to bring my dog to work every day. In my world, dental practice situation, that's not appropriate. We can't do that. And so if I'm now, asking that question, that sort of question in a particular workplace may not be a helpful process to go down, because you can't make everyone happy, because it's up to them to make themselves happy, and happy people are happy in this work environment or that work environment because they're a happy person. If, however, the feedback is the way I train you, are you learning well from me? How can I improve the way I train you so you get greater value and benefit? That's worthwhile feedback. And that's worthwhile feedback from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What if the feedback, you're asking feedback around the way our systems actually achieve the values and the purpose and the mission of the business? That's something that's going to be more top down rather than bottom up. And so I think we need to understand, and I am going to maintain, I may be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. It's not going to be the
Surely
first time.
not. Let me give you some feedback, Julie.
But I think that we do need to recognize that not all opinions are equal.
I would agree. Not all opinions are equal. What about if the opinion is of your team members? Because actually, if you've got people reporting to you, their feedback does matter, and probably equally so, because they are all reporting to you, and you do directly impact you do impact their success and failure in the organization. Yes, they impact themselves, but if you're leading them and you're not able to connect with them, you're not able to train them, you're not able to communicate with them, there is a responsibility, I think, to receive feedback and to adjust. It's actually, my very strong opinion is that it's kind of like being the parent, right? It is not your employee's job to change themselves for you. You're the leader, you're the responsible adult here, you're the one who really needs to focus on how do I get the best out of you. And if I've done everything that I can in terms of my systems, my processes, my onboarding, my leadership, my what have you, if I can completely validate that I've done everything I can, and you as an employee are now still failing, now it's you, it's not me. But I've got to validate to myself that I've done everything I can to help you learn the best way, to help you understand the importance of certain decisions that need to be made in the business, to help you have a good experience while you're in the workplace. I do believe that's the leader's responsibility. So going back to feedback, is there a case to then seek feedback from your direct reports? And how do you receive that feedback in a way that doesn't then blow back on those people that we're actually seeking feedback from?
Yeah. And I think what you've touched on is absolutely ideal, because feedback is something that we are required to receive in order to get better in any way, whether it be work or our personal life, relationships, whatever it is. We need to be open to feedback if we wish to get better in any way. That's what getting better is all about. It's about identifying areas. What did Charles say once? You can't pull out the weeds until you see them. It's about identifying where the weeds are and doing what you can to pull them out. So what about we flip it and go, it's not the feedback I'm uncomfortable with, it's my response that I'm uncomfortable with, my response to the feedback. And so let me imagine somebody who receives feedback magnificently. How would they receive feedback and now want to copy that and start making that be my response? I know that with Toastmasters, we've both been part of Toastmasters in the past, and that's an effective kind of training ground, isn't it? To receive feedback, points for improvement with a lovely, happy smile on your face.
Yeah, and just going around in circle a little bit, and I'll also then come back to the, who would receive good feedback. But back on Toastmasters, and going back to your point of be careful who you receive the information from, I did get to the point where I was like, okay, thank you for giving me that feedback, but what you're saying contradicts the feedback that I've received from people who are great speakers and who have provided me with excellent feedback in the past. And so, and because you're a early speaker and you haven't got the runs on the board and you haven't got this experience, and it does contradict an opinion of someone else who I respect, I'm just going to file that away. I'm going to say thank you because I appreciate you stepping up to give that to me, but I'm not going to change as a result of that. So I think that when we do receive feedback, it is okay not to accept it all, but that's on a skill, right? Whereas when I think what the challenge when leadership comes in is it's how we're interacting with individuals, and people try to say you're wrong. This is like the biggest frustration that I've ever experienced is, Julie, I feel this way when you do this, and for you to come back and say, yeah, but you're wrong. It's like,
I don't accept it because you're wildly wrong.
I don't. And people who are listening, like, I'm sure there would have been an occasion where people are like, no, your opinion's wrong. And it's like, how can it? My feeling is, how can my feeling be wrong? It can't. How does it?
I feel this way. I literally feel this way.
So
I'm feeling it. I know.
So I think that in leadership positions, we really have to be open to the experience of others, because if it's impacting their performance, it's impacting our success. And so we really have to, it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong, especially in terms of how we're interacting as leaders with them. They can be wrong all they like, but actually they're right and it's impacting performance, and it's our responsibility to adjust ourselves or to work with them to find a better ground. So coming back around to the, how would someone who receives feedback in really positively do this? I think that I do like that, but I'm probably more of an intention setter. So, and actually Brendan Burchard, I've got his book somewhere.
I love it when you look at your bookcase, because I can't see the bookcase. I can just all of a sudden see you looking around your room like Brendan's actually there somewhere. Hiding behind a chair. Where are you, Brendan? Come out.
I'd show you, except that the books that I'm 3/4 of the way through reading are all stacked up here, so it's quite messy. Brendan Burchard talks about, and actually Abraham Hicks talks about segment intending, and Brendan Burchard talks about transitions. And so this is when you're going into a new segment and you set an intention into that segment. So setting an intention of, I want to receive the feedback with grace. I want to receive the feedback with openness and growth. I want to receive feedback with curiosity. I want to be patient with myself. I want to be forgiving to myself if I feel a little bit confronted. I want to give myself permission to take a break if I feel like I need to. And so setting an intention, if you're going into a situation where you are actively seeking feedback and giving yourself a roadmap of how you want to experience that, can really help set the intention of the mindset going into that. And incidentally, this can be really helpful with doing performance appraisals, just reverse engineering it a little bit. One of the things that I found somewhere and I encourage my clients to do is two things. Number one is to ask someone, how are you feeling about this process right at the start? Because a lot of performance appraisals can be really uncomfortable, and just being able to give someone the experience of like, oh, I feel really stressed out. You know what? I feel a little bit stressed out myself. Let's work towards a different outcome, and then talk about the outcome that you want at the end as well. So I like to encourage people to think about from the start, what do we want at the end? So at the end
I love that. That's great.
So even at the end of feedback, if I said to you, Julie, I'd love to receive some feedback from you. The outcome that I'd like is I'd really like some tangible behaviours that you could suggest for me to improve in those areas, and perhaps a cadence of accountability so that I can check back in to see an improvement. Would that be okay with you? So then I've gone in with a mindset and I've driven it to an outcome that I want to have, so that between the mindset and the outcome, that can help us navigate these experiences. What are your thoughts on this kind of, I suppose, framework to receiving feedback?
I love it. I love it. Because if we don't have any thought around our management of the feedback, our goal going is I don't want any negative feedback. None of us are perfect. And so really tapping into the reasons why it's uncomfortable, and then developing a belief around that, I think, is key, and choosing, selecting, even role-playing what your ideal reaction is. And I know that in Toastmasters, one of the things that you're trained in is not just to be able to speak publicly and deliver a 5 to 7 minute speech, but we're also trained in how to deliver feedback, how to deliver an effective evaluation. So if feedback is something that is delivered by your team members on a regular basis, I think it's worthy of maybe once a year doing a quick little workshop. Remember, this is how we deliver feedback, because sometimes it's the delivery that can be quite confrontational. The content's not that bad. It may be delivered in an aggressive way, or there's nothing good about you. It's just this terrible thing about you. And having that as an opportunity to improve everyone's performance in that space of feedback is possibly a good idea. I just love role plays so much. Role playing gives us the physical experience of having done it before. It also helps us move through different uncomfortable emotions, and we're all okay at the end. So I think role playing is a fantastic opportunity to become comfortable with the response you're going to deliver to somebody. Because I agree, it's good to receive feedback from everybody. And you're not going to tell that person, well, thanks so much for your feedback, but you're really not that skilled, so I'm not going to take it on board, but thanks for offering it anyway. You got to say to everybody what you want to be able to do. You want time to contemplate. So one of your chosen responses could be, Shannyn, I hear you. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you contributing that towards me, or contributing that to me. And then you walk away and you do with that information what you will, because at the end of the day, what is feedback? How do we manage feedback? We get feedback both when it's intentionally delivered and also when it's accidentally delivered. We're driving down the road and someone toots us and we think, what the hell did I just do wrong? What did I do wrong? Did I go through a line? Did I swerve over to the other lane? What did I do wrong?
And then if you're anything like me, you spend the next hour kind of trying to analyze.
That's it. And that's what we do. We get feedback from all of these different areas. We don't respond and change who we are because of all the pieces of feedback. We have it go through this process of filtering and assessment, and then and analysis. That's a tricky word. And therefore, if we look at feedback not as criticism, not as unhelpful, but feedback is purely data that we then choose to do whatever we like with. So it's not personal, it's just data. And if we, as a human being, and I would imagine that many human beings would like to get better over time. Right now, I'm 50. I know I look 40.
You look amazing.
But if somebody said, are you better than you were when you were 40? I would think, I bloody hope so. I want to get better as my life goes on. When I'm 60, I hope I'm better than I am right now. God, hope I'm better than I am right now. So in order for me to get better, I therefore must embrace feedback, because it's my only way to get better. And so I think if we shift what our belief is around what feedback means to us, that could possibly help change our experience of it. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And one of the things that keeps coming up for me is a concept by Marshall Goldsmith, and it's called feed forward. And I really actually encourage people to look this up and to utilize it. It's such a great tool, because the feed forward method invites specific feedback on something that you specifically want to improve on. So one of the challenges with asking for feedback is that I might say to you, Julie, how can I improve? And you might say to me, well, Shannyn, really, your forehead's very large when you've got your hair back. So I would prefer you to wear your hair down during our podcast.
that is the kind of feedback I do offer to people and strangers in the street. It's just how they physically appear to me.
No, thank you. And for those who haven't seen us on YouTube and want to look at my forehead, then check us out on our YouTube channel.
It's enormous. No.
I was coming up with it on the whim. What can I have? That's ridiculous. Now, I actually don't really care about whether my forehead's big or not, or whether my forehead is offensive to you or not. So you giving me feedback on reducing the size of my forehead is not going to add value to our conversation. What I'm better off to actually ask you for is, Julie, I would really like to improve in my analogies when I'm doing the podcast with you.
That would be a worthy project.
And in Feed Forward, I specifically seek a feed forward on a topic that I am actually looking to improve on. And it might have come through feedback through some other method. I might have heard in the grapevine that I become defensive when I'm receiving feedback. So I want to improve on my defensiveness. So what I would do is, or doing analogies, but we use defensiveness. So what I would do to seek feed forward is, Julie, I would really like to improve the way that I receive feedback and be less defensive. Can you give me some specific behaviours that I could try on to practice improving the defensiveness? Now, the interesting thing with Feed Forward is you don't get to tell me whether I need to improve my defensiveness or not. I am saying I want to improve this. I also don't have to take on your advice, and you don't get an opportunity to say, you know what, that's great. I'm glad you bring it up. All I'm asking for is some behaviours. With the Feed Forward method as well, when you give me the behaviours, and we're talking specific behaviours, or it might be mindset, but specific behaviours, I just say thank you. I don't have to agree that those behaviours are anything that I like or try on, but you've given me a gift by giving me your experience of how I might be able to improve. So I say thank you. Then part of the Feed Forward method is to then come back and have a cadence of improvement. So I would come back to you and say, I'm going to try these behaviours to improve my defensiveness. I would love, in a week's time, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to ask you on the basis of how I've performed this week, I'd like another round of behaviours. So you set the expectation that I'm going to come back. And there's a couple of things that happen with Feed Forward is by coming back, people are looking to see you improving. And by looking for it, they actually see it. And because it then becomes a method of, you actively want to improve in this area, so I'm going to give you less of a hard time if I see you being defensive, because I can see that you're actually actively trying to improve that behaviour. So Marshall Goldsmith Feed Forward, it's a very simple method. I encourage people to look into it because it doesn't have the negative connotations of feedback. And it doesn't have the risk of feedback where, I didn't realise that I had a forehead problem, but now I do, and I'm going to spend hours analysing and trying to contour.
I'm going to make get a fringe and cover up my forehead. Mind you, if you're just a listener, her forehead is remarkably normal. I'm not going to comment about the other parts of the body.
I'm not talking about her teeth, but...
But I think it's a positive as well that we are uncomfortable with feedback. Even if we get more comfortable with feedback, that allows us the gift of is acknowledging how the other person feels when we're delivering them feedback in the performance review. We can be more compassionate in our approach to them and be more mindful of their space and how they're responding to it as well. So I think there's a benefit to that. It helps make us a more compassionate leader when we experience what we are putting others through.
Do you think, it's a bit of a leading question actually, do you think there's a risk that busy leaders don't take time to receive the feedback? Like, I'm really happy to hear your feedback, but actually I'm so busy that yeah, and now I just need to fix the problem that I saw that you were doing the other week. Do you think that that exists, and how can we help leaders to do that differently?
I think that's a risk that leaders do that in every aspect of their business, because what business is all about is big picture thinking, hiring the best people possible and understanding who they are, how they're going to, fit on the bus and the systems they're going. All of these wonderful things, this big thinking to direct the behavior of all these people, but that all gets put to the side because what's happening in the moment right now, we've spoken about this many times, is all the important urgent stuff. In that Eisenhower matrix, we all are doing the important urgent stuff most of our days, I imagine. And I think the thing that would allow and push and make time for the other important stuff is just that prioritizing of it, that there is mind, body, spirit. Charles talked about mind, body, spirit, and you look after each one of them equally to feel like you've got a nice balanced life. That's the same too in business, that I'm looking after the business, I'm looking after the employees, the clients, and self, and making sure each of those areas are paid due attention, because each one of those areas needs to be nurtured and fostered in order to achieve success overall. And if one of your hopefully, we want to be a leader with a growth mindset. We've had growth mindset in the past episode. And we want to be surrounded with people with a growth mindset as well. Just before we got on and started recording, you were talking about somebody who's got a more fixed mindset and how difficult it is to get great progress with discussions with that person because they're fixed in their own beliefs rather than being flexible and having discussions and inquiry around things. It funnels the conversation down to be a little bit unhelpful. So we want to have that growth mindset. I want to become a better leader, a better business manager, a better team member, a better everything. And in order to do that, I need to devote the appropriate time and energy towards it. It's so important to me that therefore I'm going to prioritize it high enough that it gets scheduled into my system.
I think that's the thing. I think the key, you would be able to sing on this song sheet for days. The key to success is really scheduling that in and actually dedicating time to this activity and whatever that activity is, but so that it's not just done on a bit of a whim. And I think that if we do actually schedule time, then it gives us also permission to plan for those conversations. So if the idea of setting those intentions and setting a bit of an outcome thinking works for our listeners, then giving yourself that dedicated time and setting yourself, okay, in this time, here's my intention, here's what I want to get out of it. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to, honor the process. I'm going to give myself time to take a break if I want to. I'm going to give myself time to do this. I'm going to do walking because I know sitting face to face can be a bit confronting for me. So I'm going to do it while I'm walking. Giving ourselves permission to do it in a way so that we can receive it with the level of growth that we want to have.
And I think, it's interesting when you said giving ourselves permission, what my thought went to is the preparation, our reaction and response to the thing, the performance review, the feedback session, or whatever. Is that just as important as the feedback session? Because if it's not managed, if it's not planned for well, if your response is completely unhelpful, then the feedback session is going to be a destructive thing in possibly both your lives, yours and the employees. Whereas if you've planned well, you've set that intention, this is how we want to come out from this meeting, this is going to be my response to the feedback, then all of a sudden you're shifting the meaning you take from that feedback session, and it's going to become a helpful thing instead. And so as we, outside of COVID restrictions, we plan to go and have a meeting somewhere that's half an hour drive away, we don't schedule anything in that half an hour in our calendars because that's going to be driving time. So maybe that's what we should be doing before the feedback session, before the performance review. I'm always going to block off half an hour prior to, because the contemplation is just as important as the meeting itself. Whether I go for a walk, sit quietly, whatever it is, that contemplation is just as important. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are
American. We've gone
are
into America.
Yeah,
Gone for a travel.
global. You know what? I'm going to challenge the thought. I think that it is actually important to put contemplation time down. I think that if our leaders are so time poor, the idea of doing a half-hour preparation for a 1-hour meeting can be so confronting that it's like, are you kidding? I'm not going to do anything at all. I think that if you're on board with the idea of a contemplation prior to a feedback session or seeking feedback, I do believe that you can do it the expressway. And it's about deciding how you can approach it to get the outcome that you're seeking. And I'd encourage people to not be seeking an outcome of, well, I just want them to see things my way. Not necessarily. I'd be more around the intention of how can I approach this? I want to approach this with a growth mindset. I want to approach this with an openness. I want to approach this with without the defensiveness, and how can I do that? And so if that only takes you 5 minutes to prepare, then it's 5 minutes and you've done it. It's better than not doing it at all, because half an hour is too much. So I'm probably a little bit pragmatic in terms of the do what you can with the time that you've got available and do it as efficiently as you can, but do it. Because I know myself, I've got a bit of a habit of just running right up to the end, and it's like, and now I'm doing the thing, and I haven't set any sort of intention around it. But even if I just took a minute to set up for the next thing, whatever that was, I know that I would enter into the next thing with greater opportunity for growth and for greater connection and better outcomes for all involved.
That's good. That's good. And I know that we are possibly coming up to time, but I wanted to just quickly touch on, and this is where, if this is happening, it might be a helpful thing to have a discussion, a brainstorming session, a bit of a workshop on how to deliver effective feedback. And depending on the level of self-awareness and maturity of the person delivering the feedback, what would your management be personally, internally, if you asked for a young person to provide you feedback and they give you quite broad but hurtful things because for whatever reason they're not enjoying their space with you, and they go, great, this is a lovely opportunity. I think I find you a little bit bitchy and I'm not quite sure why anyone would want to work with you. And you actually feel like it's a personal attack on you. What are your thoughts around that?
I love the word curiosity, and I know I've mentioned it a couple of times today. When that sort of feedback is received by us, it can be quite jarring. But if you become curious about where it's coming from, there can be great insight. And I think also one of the things that the gurus say in terms of giving feedback is being able to give examples. So if you're unsure, be curious and say, okay, this is interesting, and I'm really and actually be grateful. It would not be easy for someone to say to your face that they think that you're a bit bitchy. Let's be honest. So kudos to them for actually having the courage to say that to you. Now, obviously, depending on what their intention is, you take that with the grace of it. But you've asked them for feedback and they're giving this feedback. So thank them, be grateful for it. Then be curious about where it's coming from. Can you give me an example of where I displayed that behaviour? Because I'd really love to learn. This is a surprise to me. I haven't been described that way before. I'm not judging what you're saying, but I'm curious to know more. So can you give me some examples of where you've seen me be this way? Or can you give me some ideas of what I do that you perceive as bitchy?
Yeah, that's a wonderful piece of advice. If it is too broad, if it's said in a mean-spirited way, bringing it back to, can you give me specific examples, brings the session back to a helpful place again. I love that.
But I think very much, and as I said, repeating it again, the spirit of curiosity, because even saying, well, give me some examples. Like, you know, there's a very big difference between saying, okay, thank you. Can you give me some examples so that I can understand what I'm doing and how it's being perceived? But I really need some examples to put some tangibility around it. That's a very open conversation as opposed to the defensive, well, okay, well, just can you give me some examples because I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's key as well, isn't it? Because the minute we start getting defensive in any space around feedback, whether it's being delivered in a helpful way or not, the minute we get defensive, that's when it all starts to go down the gurgler, isn't it? We're raw, we're sensitive, and the way we are responding to that feedback is ensuring the other person's then going to respond to our negative response, and it's going to go back and forth and not be an enjoyable process.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you are the leader, if you become defensive, you're not going to get a positive outcome. The person that you're leading is not going to step up and lead you through your emotional turmoil. They're not. It's not their responsibility. So if you arc up back at them, they're then in this position of what do I do with this? I can't coach you through this. I can't lead you through this, because if I try to do this, you will give me an absolute caning. So I'm just going to either fire back, exactly as you said, or I'm going to go to ground. I'm going to go into flight or fight response. And you, leader, are the one who's going to cop that. And then, leader, you're going to be back in that flight and fight response. So there's a real sense of responsibility that we have as leaders to be aware of that flight and fight response that we'll have, and be prepared to seek information of how we can get from that other person a good outcome, because presumably we're seeking feedback because we do actually want to improve. It's not lip service. And if you are seeking feedback for lip service, then there's a real question around why are you asking for it in the first place. Like, you know.
Yeah, I like to just ask for feedback from people that like me. They only got good things to say.
I don't want to receive feedback at all. No.
Well, just to finish off, I've got another quick thing. I want to squeeze this one in, and this one was more about rejection, but I think it plays a role in the feedback section as well. Can you remember there was a thing on YouTube years ago of a person that was so wounded by rejection, they wanted to get used to it. And so they went out in the street and they went up to person after person after person saying, can you give me $100? Can you give me $100? And person after person said, no, and rejected him over and over again. Some people actually did give him the money, but more often than not, they were saying no. And I think he did it 100 or 200 times.
I think it was 100. He did 100. He asked, 100 times, or there was 100 dates, or there's been plenty of people who followed on the footsteps, preparing.
And so the lesson to learn from that is that these people, the more often they heard the rejection, possibly the more you would make it, the more often you hear that negative piece of feedback. The more often you hear that rejection or that negative feedback, the more often you hear it, the less power it ends up having in your life. It just becomes data that goes through to you.
Except if you continue to hear it and you're not actually improving in it and it's causing problems in your organisation, that would be one where I would really seek some external support to work through those issues.
Well, it's been delightful, Shannyn. Can I take this opportunity to remind all of our listeners and viewers that if you are enjoying this program, this podcast, please jump on and give us a 5-star review. Regular listeners will know that we don't like anything less than 5 stars. So if you can leave it as the 5 stars, that makes us very happy. And a review, if you'd like to give us a review as well. And on the YouTube and podcast, push in subscribe, that in every couple of weeks you'll find us in your inbox.
Just basically stalk us wherever you can, sign up, register. And I love how you sort of said, Julie, if you've enjoyed it, we've gotten to the end of another podcast. So I'm going to assume that there's something that you've enjoyed in it.
Either that, or they've collapsed on the ground and they can't move and they desperately want to hit that stop button and they plug it there.
Or they're just staring at my forehead.
They're in a trance. Oh my God, it's huge. Oh my God.
And if you've listened to this via the podcast, do go and check out my forehead via the YouTube channel, just for funsies.
She's got the wide angle lens on.
just in wrapping up, Julie, this is a really great opportunity for us to be open for feedback. This is episode 20, and we would genuinely love to receive your feedback on what you're enjoying and what you're enjoying and what you are not enjoying, because we would love to improve. We will be defensive on our own, and then we will feed it back to our audience on what we're going to do with it. So please do that. And whether you like it or not, 5-star review.
That's it. I look forward to speaking to you next time.
And you too, Julie. I will speak to you soon.
Ciao, ciao.